She did not sleep. Not because she could not, she had trained herself to sleep in worse places than a firelit guest chamber with a goose-down mattress and a locked door, but because the question Varek Thornvale had asked her over dinner was still sitting in the center of her chest like a blade that had not yet decided how deep it intended to go. "Who sent you to Kalemore?" She lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the stone ceiling, and ran the variables. He suspected the arrangement was a vehicle. He did not know for whom or for what. He had asked rather than acted, which meant he was gathering information rather than moving against her, which meant she still had time. What she did not have was certainty about how much. At 2 hours before dawn she rose, reset the blade in her sleeve, and went to learn the castle. This was the part of infiltration work that no briefing file could fully substitute for. The physical grammar of a place, the way its corridors connected, which doors were guarded by habit rather than instruction, where the light failed and where it held. She moved through the keep's inner passages in the manner she had been trained to move through spaces that were not hers, unhurried, purposeful, never still enough to look like she was hiding. She found 3 things the briefing maps had not included. The first was a door at the end of the north corridor behind a tapestry of a hunting scene in faded red and black that opened onto a narrow stair descending to what smelled like old paper and lamp oil. A private archive of some kind, locked with a mechanism more sophisticated than anything else in the keep. The second was a guard rotation gap of approximately 4 minutes in the eastern wing, occurring at the change of the second watch, which was either an oversight or a test. The third was Varek Thornvale himself, standing at the window of his study with a candle burning low beside him, and a letter in his hand that he was reading with the focused stillness of a man receiving information he had been waiting a long time to receive. He did not hear her. She was very good at not being heard. She watched him for 12 seconds, which was 11 seconds longer than was operationally necessary, and then she moved back into the corridor and continued her circuit of the keep, and did not think about the expression on his face, which had been something she did not have a clean word for. Not grief exactly. Not anger. Something that lived in the territory between them where a person went when they had been proven right about something they had hoped to be wrong about. She returned to her chamber before the household stirred and changed into the forest green gown and pinned her hair, and became Lady Ashvale again by the time Sarah Vane knocked to bring her morning tea. The city below Kalemore was visible from the keep's southern terrace, a grey stone sprawl that tumbled down the ridge in uneven levels, connected to the castle by the long iron lantern causeway. Wren had requested a walk on the terrace as part of her mourning, which was the kind of request an arranged bride might reasonably make, and which gave her a direct sight line to the causeway and the market district beyond it. She spotted Doran in 4 minutes. He was leaning against the wall of a grain merchant's storefront 2 streets back from the causeway entrance, rolling something between his fingers, copper coin most likely, dressed in rust red and dark brown like half the working men in any city in the region. He was not looking at the keep. He was looking at a point slightly to the left of the keep, which was how she knew he was watching the keep. She felt something she identified after a moment as irritation. Not at Doran specifically. Doran was doing his job, which was to watch her do hers and step in if she failed to do it. The irritation was at the shape of the situation, the clock Maren had set, the shadow Maren had placed, the architecture of a contract that had trusted her enough to send her in, and not quite enough to send her in alone. 2 days and 3 hours remaining. She turned from the terrace railing and found Varek standing 6 feet behind her.
You were looking at the city.
I find it easier to understand a place from a distance before I try to understand it from inside.
That is an unusual habit for a lady of a minor house.
I had an unusual upbringing.
Yes, I expect you did.
He said the last line without emphasis, which was worse than if he had said it with emphasis. She held Lady Ashvale's expression and did not let anything move behind it, and he looked at her for a moment with those amber eyes that she was developing a specific and inconvenient wariness of, and then he offered his arm and said he would show her the eastern gardens if she had no objection, and she took his arm because Lady Ashvale would take his arm, and because the eastern gardens were adjacent to the eastern wing and she wanted another look at that guard rotation gap. The gardens were not what the word suggested. They were old and slightly wild, stone paths threading between overgrown hedgerows and dormant winter beds, with a fountain at the centre that had not run water in what looked like several seasons. It was not neglected exactly. It was paused, as if someone had intended to return to it and kept not finding the time.
Did these belong to someone?
My mother kept them. She died when I was 14.
And you never took them over yourself?
I kept thinking I would. That turned out to be the same as not doing it.
She looked at the fountain and thought about a 14-year-old boy in a castle full of brothers and politics, and a garden that had belonged to someone who was gone, and she thought about the letter in his study at 2 a.m, and the expression on his face, and she made herself stop thinking about these things because they were not operationally relevant, and she had 1 day and 20 hours left, and relevance was the only currency she could afford right now. That evening, she found the archive door unlocked, not forced, not tampered with, unlocked with the key sitting in the mechanism as if it had been placed there for someone to find. She stood in the corridor behind the hunting tapestry for a long moment, blade loose in her sleeve, reading the silence for intent. Then she went in. The archive was one long, low-ceilinged room lined with iron shelving, hundreds of sealed cases and leather-bound records going back generations. But what was on the desk at the room's center was not old. It was a single open ledger, a record of payments, names and dates and figures in a careful hand. And at the bottom of the most recent page, circled in fresh ink as if someone wanted to make absolutely certain it was not missed, was a name she recognized, not Varek's name, Sable Orrin's. Her hand was on the ledger page and her mind was moving very fast through the implications when she heard the door behind her open, and she turned with the blade already clearing her sleeve and stopped. It was not a guard. It was Varek, holding a candle, looking at her with an expression that was not surprise, not anger, and not the expression of a man who had walked in on something he had not expected. He had left the door unlocked. He had left the ledger open. He had circled the name himself.
I was not certain you would come tonight, but I thought if you were what I believe you are, you would not be able to help yourself.
I was not certain you would come tonight, he said, as if they were continuing a conversation that had begun at dinner the night before. But I thought if you were what I believe you are, you would not be able to help yourself. The blade was in her hand. His eyes went to it briefly, and then came back to her face. I am not your enemy, Wren, he said, and then quieter. And I think you are beginning to suspect that the person who sent you here might be.